Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's episode of Inside the Story. I am your guest host, Isabelle Rosini, and today I am joined by the Washington Times online opinion editor, Cheryl Chumley. Cheryl, thank you so much for joining us today. It's a pleasure to have you.
It's great to be with you. Thank you.
Yeah, so this is a hot topic of the week, although there are many busy news week, but the science, as they call him, is retiring. Yeah, I mean, I correct me if I'm wrong, but I remember there were rumors swirling around about this a couple weeks ago, and he said he wasn't going to retire, but now he is. So what do you think? Why now? What do you think is the motivation behind this, and any thoughts that you had on this in general?
Well, I've never been a fan of Anthony Fauci,
Uh huh.
so I'm very happy to see him finally go. But it's a few years too late, really,
Mm-hmm.
into this coronavirus. I think he's leaving now because he's come to the end of his usefulness in terms of pushing COVID policy while denying that he's actually pushing COVID policy. I think America is returning to at least some semblance of normalcy. There are too many spots around America where we're still going by so-called sound science that dictates we have to wear face masks and social distance and so forth. And that's due to Anthony Fauci's deceptions about the coronavirus. But I think he's come to the end of his most powerful usefulness to push the left's call for clampdowns. And now he's ready to step aside and just receive his media fawning, which,
Mm-hmm.
if you've noticed, he has been the
Yeah.
last few days. And he's going to live off of millions of dollars of taxpayer pension funds. I think he's going to collect something like $330,000 each year now of retirement.
That's crazy to think about. He's going to be very comfortable. And I mean, as you mentioned, to think about the heavy hand that he had in promoting lockdowns. I mean, all the people who've lost their livelihoods, lost their lives over the past two years or so, however long the lockdowns really ended up lasting. It's really astounding to think about. But I mean, yeah, you mentioned the media fawning. I was preparing to talk to you today. I was reading like probably one of the cringiest pieces I've seen in a while in the Washington Post, just about Fauci, carrying our angst and being a sign of certainty in uncertain times. And I mean, I don't really get, I, I don't get how they can still carry that so much water for him after all that has happened. I mean, yeah, what do you think? Why are they so eager to kind of manufacture this legacy of him being, this kind of almost like a prophet or a saint or something? I mean, I'm sure you've seen the votive candles that they've been selling. They're awful, but yeah, what do you make of that? Why are they so adamant to make sure that we leave with a good taste in our mouth, despite like the truth and what we know?
Yeah, they have painted Anthony Fauci as the sort of savior of
Mm-hmm.
humanity, as you rightly referenced,
Mm-hmm.
for a very long time now. And it's disgusting to me because the man is a liar. He has
Mm-hmm.
spent over 2 years lying and deceiving the American public about the proper response to the coronavirus. And you needed to only turn on the TV and watch mainstream media for one day to see on one station he would recommend this, on another
Mm-hmm.
station he would recommend that. But here's the thing that was the biggest outrage to me. He always pretended as if he was just a hands-off policy, hands-off politics type of
Mm-hmm.
guy, in it only for the sound science that he represented. But really, if you listen to the narrative and his messaging and the words he chose, he constantly pushed policy and dictates, and those who dared go against his particular recommendations, he turned around and ran to the nearest media outlet and
Mm-hmm.
condemned them. And I think of some of the states that tried to open before Anthony Fauci gave his stamp of approval: Florida, Georgia, South
Mm-hmm.
Dakota certainly was under his attack. But
Mm-hmm.
as soon as they tried to open, he ran to the media and he condemned them for putting in jeopardy lives and so forth. So now the media, who has all along branded Anthony Fauci as the go-to guy on the coronavirus, can't afford to distance themselves now, right? Mm-hmm. They were in it from the beginning, backing Anthony Fauci, and they have to stay with that narrative in order to save face themselves.
Right. So, I mean, journalists have completely lost the thread. Like you said, it's all about keeping up a narrative rather than, hey, actually, I admit that we were wrong, and maybe, there's more to this. But it's really crazy to see. But yeah, you mentioned that he would kind of say one thing here, another there. What do you think are some of Fauci's for lack of a better phrase, greatest hits? I mean, I remember the mask debacle where we were told not to, or just the cloth masks were fine, but then it turns out they don't work nearly as well, or they don't really work. They don't, compared to the N95 mask. And of course they came out and said, oh, well, we didn't want, nurses to have a shortage. We want the hospitals to be fully stocked. But that's just something that, why not say that? Why not be transparent from the onset? So in your opinion, do you think, I think that's a particularly egregious example of one of his greatest hits, but is there anything else that you can think of?
Well, in terms of just something that he said that just was so eyebrow raising when he talked about if one mask is good, two masks are better. Yeah. It's just common sense. Then, biological extension, what about 9 masks? What about a dozen masks? It was ridiculous. And especially coming from somebody who said he represented science, that's a very unscientific thing to say. But the thing that struck me most about Anthony Fauci is that every time he spoke, he would couch his words in such a way that you could take them and run with it any direction you wanted. He would say hundreds of lives could potentially be saved if we did this, or if we took this, perhaps. He never just came out and said with any clarity what could happen. A plus B equals C, or 1 plus 2 equals 3. He didn't do any type of talking like that. Everything he said was couched in very carefully worded language, so you could never nail him down as saying something. And that's exactly why I call him such a deceiver, because if science is truthful, you say it with clarity and you say it definitively. And Anthony Fauci, in terms of his greatest hits, was that he never came forth with a statement that was clear and decided and actual truthful.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. I think that, as you mentioned earlier, I think one of the more insidious I think people liked him. They liked his demeanor. I think they were very, willing to accept him as like a voice of reason just because of, his general presence. And I do agree, on a very surface level, he did have a calming presence. But you're right. If you really do pay attention to his rhetoric, he never said anything of substance, anything of certainty, of clarity. And I think that's actually one of the more insidious ways that, as a quote unquote policymaker, can really be harmful. And I think obviously we've seen that harm. I think some politicians are, and he's not a politician, but he's very political. But I think some people are more forthright with their duplicity, and I don't know. So I think that's not scary, but the concerning thing about Fauci, which you hit right on the nose, it wasn't as noticeable as it is in other people who are, the experts or the leaders or politicians or what have you. But yeah, so something that we've been seeing a lot is Republicans coming out saying, if we take back the majority, we're gonna get right to it, investigating Fauci. And we've seen, kind of Rand Paul already take the charge on this. How much do you think how much of this is grandstanding, do you think, and how much do you think will actually come to fruition?
I think 90% of it is grandstanding
Mm-hmm.
because there have been only a select few on Capitol Hill, Rand Paul being one of them,
Mm-hmm.
Ron Johnson, Senator Ron Johnson being another, who have all along questioned Anthony Fauci's politics and policies and who have demanded that he be accountable for the rhetoric that he puts forth. By and large, most on Capitol Hill have just either been silent about Anthony Fauci or even helpful in advancing his particular brand of so-called science. And,
Mm-hmm.
if legislators, if senators on Capitol Hill had wanted to do something about Anthony Fauci, they certainly had 2.5 years to do something
Mm-hmm.
already. And specifically, I would like to see legislation come forward and be passed. And this is what Republicans actually should campaign on right now. One of the issues they should campaign on is to say that emergency health orders can only go forward for a certain time limit, and they can never be passed endlessly like they continue to be done to this day.
Right.
There are still states now living under coronavirus emergency health orders. Joe Biden, our own president, signed an extension of an emergency health
Mm-hmm.
order in March on COVID. So Republicans in Congress can certainly reel back the Anthony Fauci's of the world by
Mm-hmm.
doing that little bit of legislation without even having to grandstand and bring them up on Capitol Hill, which sounds great, but in the end, what good is it going to do?
Right. Yeah. I mean, I'm all for the show, but after a certain point, like what is it actually accomplishing? So yeah, I do. I think the idea, like you said, of actual legislation that will curb this kind of overreach and power grab. I think that's a really good solution and maybe one that we should hear more about instead of just like constant talk of investigations. So I agree with you there. So I mean, I think we touched upon his legacy a bit already. So yeah, I mean, we're seeing two kind of completely different narratives. One, which I think you and I can agree is the true narrative, and then the other, which is being kind of peddled by his friends. So ultimately, I mean, there's also the question of the legacy of how a figure like Fauci affects the integrity of our institutions, trust in institutions. How do you think him leaving, how does that all kind of square away with him going? I mean, I think, I'm sure you've noticed, or you would agree, that we tend to, I think as Americans, not everyone, but I think generally tend to put a lot of trust in people just because they're just so-called experts. But do you think we'll see any kind of change there following all this, or?
You know, Sadly, no.
Mm-hmm.
Honestly, I would hope that after 2.5 years of the government bureaucrats telling us what to do based on health impacts that we should be making on our own, that we would have fought back enough now. But I
Mm-hmm.
still see in Northern Virginia people riding around with their face masks on in their cars by
Yeah.
themselves. And that tells me there are still too many Americans out there who are fearful and aren't paying attention to the actual science. They're only paying attention to what their local government bureaucrats tell them, or what their Twitter feed tells them, or what CNN tells them. And look, if we don't recapture in this country the idea that liberty trumps the scientific community, and that individual choice must stay above what the medical bureaucrats tell us to do.
Mm-hmm.
And if we don't recapture in this country the idea of God-given rights, and that includes making decisions based on health for ourselves and our family, then the next time a virus comes around, the next time a pandemic breaks, the next time Bill Gates issues a warning about some sort of perilous virus, the same thing's going to happen.
Right.
Anthony Fauci may be gone, but the bureaucracies still stand, and those haven't changed.
Yeah. So I guess, in accompanying kinds of legislation that would curb the bureaucratic state, I guess we need to look at ways also to get to work dismantling the bureaucratic state as well. Yeah, I agree with you. I worry about what happens when a truly deadly disease comes along, because people are so ready and willing to blindly follow anything handed from the top down. So it's very concerning. Yeah, I don't really know, but well, yeah, I mean, I'm glad Fauci's out, but I think you're right, unfortunately, about someone else will, step up. There will be more rules people will follow without much discernment. But anyway, Cheryl, thank you so much for coming on. I think that about wraps it up for us today. And thank you for your work and for, carrying the mantle of truth to the people. Because I think, as we talked about, journalism and opinion writing can get very kind of disingenuous and misleading. But I think you do an excellent job of, this is what's actually the case. So thank you for doing that. And thanks for being with us today.
Thank you. That's very nice of you to say. And I'm a big fan of FreedomWorks too. Thanks for what you guys do.
Yep, of course. We'll love to have you back sometime.
Thank you.
Yep.